You said you wanted to do that, so there you go. All right, I think we're good.
Okay. The master of the internet says we're set to go. So we're going to look at stained glass. And surprisingly, even to me, stained glass windows go back to Roman times.
I need this
And the
tomorrow
glass
for a
was
meeting.
set in either wooden frames or directly into plaster frames. Obviously, it didn't
Mess with it or
go particularly well, but because wood rots and plaster melts.
I thought you meant the whole kind.
should I put
No. Even back then, they used blown glass. So blown glass is not something as a new invention. Actually, during the Middle Ages, most all of the stained glass windows were blown glass. So I'm going to show you a little something about that. As early as the 5th century, there were writings by some of the church fathers about colored glass in windows. Lead was first used in stained glass in England as early as the 7th century. So the use of lead to hold the glass. And if you've never actually worked with glass and lead is shaped like for windows glass like an H. And the glass fits into that H, and then you solder it so that it holds. All right, let me do this now so I can get out of the way. Having lived in Corning for 3 years and been to the Corning Glass Works multiple times and watched glass blowing, this is not a very good demonstration of how in the Middle Ages you could blow glass and make it into a window. But we're going to pretend at least that the blowpipe is attached here, and there are tools you can use to open up the other end, starting with a small hole and then gradually opening it up so that you would have this kind of a cylinder. Then you cut and tap the end off and you're left with a glass cylinder, and then you cut it with the right tool and you lay it out on wet wood or metal and roll it flat. And that's how you get blown glass for stained glass windows.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah.
The colors by that time is already in there.
The color, yes.
What about figures and stuff like that?
Get to that, John. You're jumping the gun here. There was a treatise written in the 12th century by a man called Theophilus. That actually wasn't his name. I guess he didn't want anybody to know who he really was. On the basic steps to making glass and the chemical combinations that were needed to make the colors. And those combinations haven't really changed much over the last 1,000 years. Still use some of the same chemicals to make the different colors in the glass. If you're going to paint on the glass, which is the case with the windows in the church here and in most stained glass, there's a particular kind of paint that is used with a chemical base that then you refire the glass to cement that paint to the glass. Otherwise, ultimately, it would wash off. So it becomes part of the glass.
In other words, you cure it.
Yeah, it's a lot like putting a pot that has been fired and you glaze it, you fire it in the kiln to blend the glaze with the pot. And that's what you do when you paint the stained glass. You do much of the same thing. The Probably the biggest advancement came, I'm skipping some of my notes here, came in the 1100s. There was an abbot, his last name is Sugar, 1081 to 1155, and he was the one who designed the Abbey of St. Denis, and I'll show some slides of it, and was the inventor, basically, of the flying buttress. The Abbey of St. Denis is considered the very first Gothic cathedral. And what that meant was that you could reach higher with thinner walls, allowing for wider expanse of glass. In the Romanesque style, everything was very heavy. The windows were very narrow because they couldn't support what was above them. But with the flying buttress, the pressure down was alleviated and sent outward so that you could have more glass. And that was a huge advantage to use of stained glass in churches and elsewhere. And this is what he had to say about all of that. Thus, sometimes when, because of my delight in the beauty of the house of God, the multicolor loneliness of the gems has called me away from external cares and worthy meditation, transporting me from material to immaterial things, has persuaded me to examine the diversity of holy virtues, then I seem to see myself existing on some level, as it were, beyond our earthly ones, neither completely the slime of the earth, nor completely in the purity of heaven. By the gift of God, I can be transported to an anachoretical manner from the inferior level to that superior one. There was the belief that some of the purpose, if you will, of stained glass was to take the pure white light to break it down into the colors, reminiscent of creation. That out of chaos came light, and out of the light then the nurturing and the diversity of the earth in creation. And so thus the stained glass was able to break down what we can't see because it's just pure light into this multitude of colors. Once that had been mastered, then stained glass became both a teaching tool and a point of patronage. The stained glass windows portrayed biblical scenes, but then as it became more widespread, the wealthy began to attach their names to windows that they had paid for, but also getting their own portraits into those windows, their coats of arms, and eventually then stained glass made its way into private homes, the palatial estates, the great homes, the castles, and everything throughout Europe. This is all before America, so we didn't have any of it here yet. I think in the United States, it became attached in many ways to universities. Harvard has some phenomenal stained glass windows that portray professors and founders and all of that. So here we go. Onward and upward. Maybe. There we go. This is actually a piece of manuscript that's mine from 1556, and it shows the production of different kinds of blown glass. Most of it you can see is colored or clear and not colored. And you can see some of the tools and everything. So there was a real diversity in the kinds of glass that was blown. Okay. I'm going to pass around a copy of this so that you don't have to read it off the screen. But this is a glossary of stained glass terminology. Not that I'm going to be using it, but it gives you some sense.
So he's passing around a paper. That's what I just pulled up on the screen. And he's saying it's a glossary of terms that are very frequently used in stained glass. He's not necessarily going to use all of them, but maybe you could look over them and have a read through a few of them.
Rick, is the St. Denis Abbey the one on the north side of Paris?
Yes, just really just outside of
Right.
municipal Paris. All right, so what we've got here are some of the terms that are used as a stained glass glossary. I want to go down. You've got this drapery glass about 2/3 of the way down on the left-hand column. This was typical of Tiffany and the late 1800s into the 1900s. And I'll show some examples of that, but you've seen it many times where the glass seems to have a flow to it and lines in it and different depths. And it's just take some glass, you pour it on a metal table, and before it cools, you take some rollers and some other instruments and you just pull the
Shape it.
lines and pull it like you would the drapery of a drape or a dress. Let's see. Grisaille, or is that up there?
It's like the third one
The
down.
third
on
one
the
down
right
on the
hand.
right. That's a window or panel of ornamental designs composed almost exclusively of uncolored glass, in which the designs are created by the leads alone, the lines of the leaded glass, called blank glazing, or with the addition of paint or silver stain. Bum, bum, bum. We've got obsolescence glass. Again, that's a lot like the drapery glass. And a lot of lamps had obsolescent glass in them. It's a milky colored. Then we finish it out. And here's how glass is made. When I was in Corning, that was the first real introduction to glass that I had, and found out that most of the scientists are geologists because the primary component of glass is sand, silica. And then you add in different things, potash, and then you heat it. Lime stabilizes the mixture, rebuilds the network of the chemicals inside, and then the colors can be added by different cobalt for blue, copper for red, and there are others as well, which I didn't include. If anybody is really super interested, this is what I used as my Bible, if you will, the history of stained glass. It's an absolutely marvelous book. If anybody would like to borrow it, you're more than welcome to. So let's look at some stained glass. Augsburg Cathedral is believed to have the oldest existing stained glass windows. You've got Jonah, Daniel, Hosea, Moses, and David portrayed in the windows. Recently, in some restoration work at Canterbury Cathedral, um, some of the glass at Canterbury was discovered to be actually as old as the glass at Augsburg. No, wait a minute, let me get a date for you.
What country is Augsburg in?
Germany. 1110
Hmm. Wow.
is the date. So those windows are over 1,000 years old.
That's crazy.
Uh, well, when I was in Budapest, there's a gigantic synagogue, and before the invasion, all of the stained glass windows were removed and put in the basement of the church and covered with mountains of sand under and below to absorb any shock. The synagogue was never bombed because the Americans wouldn't bomb it because it was a synagogue. And so the Germans, that was their center of occupation, where their offices were, because they knew the Americans wouldn't bomb it. Which is interesting dichotomy, I guess. So
But that happened throughout a number of. Didn't that happen throughout
that
a
happened
number of
all throughout Europe.
All
Yeah,
throughout Europe, yeah.
right.
There's actually a really interesting movie that my middle schoolers have just watched about art during the war called The Monument Men.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So if you haven't seen that movie, watch that movie. It's a really incredible effort to save culture and art.
Yep. True story.
Yep.
All right. This is the Abbey of St. Denis Cathedral.
Okay, you can go ahead. I'll figure it out. Oh,
There
there
we
it is.
And you can
Sorry, guys.
see the vaulted roof, all of the glass, which never would have been possible without flying buttresses, and the Gothic arch that was used. Again, the abbot was convinced that the stained glass was essential for worship and for the inspiration of the soul. Sorry. Just with it all over the place. Can I do this?
There we go. I think I can just.
This is more of a closer view of some of the stained glass at St. Denis. It's very intricate.
Would this be painted on, or would this be that the glass itself is colored?
Some of it is painted, but most of it is the colored glass
Right.
with the leading.
It's really pretty.
If you've never been where there's a lot of stained glass, you're really missing something. It's just absolutely magnificent, really changes your perspective on things. This is Poitiers Cathedral. This is in France. Again, you can see how intricate the design is. You have biblical characters. It's called the crucifixion window. And you can see here in the middle is the cross with Christ on the cross, and then the resurrected Christ above it. I still marvel at the reality that people have been able to do this for so long. You almost think it ought to be a modern invention, because who could do that 1,000 years ago? Well, they did. They did it.
Another interesting fact about stained glass is, I'm just throwing this in there because I think it's fascinating, is the colors that are the most beautiful are the hardest to get in stained glass.
Right.
The deep reds, the deep blues,
Right.
and there's is a third one that's very difficult. They're the most difficult colors to get to come out
Right.
in the depth that they come out in stained glass. Red and blue are the top two.
Right.
There's a third one, I forget. But I lived out near Aquarian Glass and went to school, worked at Alfred University, and they have the largest glass program in New York State. So I've got to learn a lot about stained glass while I was there. Had some very good friends that went through the program, the ceramic program, ceramic engineering initially. Anyways, it's fascinating field.
This is York Minster in York, England. One of my favorite churches. I don't know if this is the north transept, but in 1982 or 83, there was a lightning strike that set the roof on fire. And unlike in Paris, the firemen made a tactical decision to literally flood the roof with so much water that it would collapse. And it saved the rest of the church. And when I was there in 86, they were just finishing up the restoration work on it. The window was saved because the roof collapsed, saved the rest of the building. And
So that there wouldn't be too much heat that could have gotten to the
Yes.
windows to destroy
Yes.
the windows.
What about Notre Dame? Did they lose a lot
the pardon?
in Notre Dame?
No, actually, the windows did not explode, which under a lot of heat, the glass will just shatter. It didn't. And I think part of that was probably because heat goes up and the roof was high enough and separated enough from the windows that it didn't. There's an interesting article I just read about some of the recent discoveries they have made about Notre Dame since the fire, that some of the work in the upper parts, there had been a lot of repairs done in the 19th century, and they didn't have any accurate documentation of all of it. And now that they've been able to get up into that attic part of the church, they're finding more restoration work that had been done in the 1890s that hadn't been documented. And they find, because initials on the wood and dates and everything. So they've really made some great discoveries because of the fire that they wouldn't have known about otherwise. This was my favorite window
Wow, that's a lot
in
of
York.
work.
It's called the Five Sisters. It's in one of the side chapels.
That's really incredible.
Color doesn't really.
Have you ever been to York?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you see this?
Yes.
You can't miss it.
Yeah,
Color
this is-
doesn't hit me
Um,
at all.
And you can see how big it is. There's a man
Yeah.
standing right there. He's no taller than that ridge on the lower arches.
What's the colors on there? What kind of bland? I mean,
Well,
is it
Doesn't impress me at all.
just the picture's not giving it justice
It-
on there?
As I recall, it's not a lot of picture. It's just glass.
Intricate design.
There is a pattern to it.
There's lots of circles on the one that's the far right. There's like lots of circles kind of coming down through it.
There's not this much red and blue.
Well, and there's not as much red and blue, right? You don't know how dirty it is either. The last time it was cleaned.
This is the rose window at York, completed in 1472.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
You wonder how they were able to get up there and place
Well,
all this.
if you really want to know, I have several books on cathedral construction. Actually, a couple of them.
Scaffoldings.
The wooden scaffolding, how, the arches. What they did was they built wooden arches, built the brick and stone on top of the wooden arches, removed it, moved it along the roof line to the next section, and then kept moving until they had it completed. It's amazing the kind of work that they could do back then. What amazes me is, you know, they would do what's called a cartoon, much the same as is done for tapestries, and you draw it all out in full size, and then you work from that cartoon um, with all of the sections. My guess is, without knowing, that while this is all cement, the framework, each of these sections then is built separately and then put in place. When I was in Dryden, we had the big rose window there restored, and what they did was to preserve the glass, they put plexiglass on the outside, but they, instead of, like a lot of churches, one big sheet or sections of plexiglass, they did individual sections of plexiglass and then vented each section, because you have to vent it, otherwise they fill with moisture from the sunlight. And then you don't even know that there's a plexiglass sheet over it, because you don't see a framework like you do on so many other churches. Okay, this is Cologne Cathedral in Germany. Um, we're getting a little bit later in time, closer to our time, and you can see how the intricacy of the windows becomes more picturesque. Um,
Wow.
this is another one of my favorite places that I hope to get to someday. The Chartres Cathedral, considered one of the great masterpieces of Gothic construction. Um, the rose window actually survived an early fire after it was initially built in the 12th century. But the top picture is a great view of those Gothic arches. Um, if that had been Romanesque, as you went around the curve of the asp, the chancel area, you might have gotten one, two windows, and all the rest would have had to have been wall, and it wouldn't have gone up that high. The rose window from Chartres is one that's repeated in a lot of artwork. This one especially. When the early Abbot Sugar and others, they talk about gems. In the oldest of the Romanesque churches, the early Christian churches, the only gems were in what are called reliquaries, which were containers for um, the remains of saints. And they were very gold and jeweled, and those were the gems of the cathedrals, along with the crosses and chalices, which were bejeweled and everything. As soon as the stained glass became perfected with the Gothic arch and the flying buttress and everything, suddenly now you had a church filled with gems and jewels. And it was accessible to everybody. This is another one of my favorite places, Lincoln Cathedral. Um, the window was constructed in the 1300s, but then was smashed out during the English Revolution. Um, it was left with just clear glass. They knew they couldn't reconstruct the window as it had originally been, and so they made a modern piece of artwork out of it, even in the 18th century, back then. So there is no picture, it's just glass.
The pattern is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a pattern inside a pattern.
Yes.
So none of these are our church windows.
We haven't gotten to our church yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
We'll get there. Just taking our time. Okay, now we're coming up into more modern times.
Hello, Pittsburgh.
Hmm?
I said hello, Pittsburgh.
Yes. When I was at a conference in Pittsburgh, we were at this church. The windows are worth millions, and the congregation was down to about 35 people at that time. This was back in the late 70s. It's come back some. It's on Millionaires Row, and that whole area of Pittsburgh has gone through a revitalization. People have restored homes. The church. The question was, what do we do with multi-million-dollar windows? Insurance. The inside of that church is also painted by Tiffany. Tiffany did a lot of paint work on structures. There's one window which I couldn't find a picture of Jesus walking on the waters. It may be this window here, that the glass is double paned with louvers of gold sheeting between the glass, so that depending on the time of the day, the water is different colors. It goes from a gold to a blue to a calm to a stormy. It's just, I sat there, I didn't pay attention to the speakers. I just turned around and watched the window change all day long.
Are they still there in this that
yes.
church?
Yeah, still there. Still there. Just, the Tiffany and others were able to manipulate colors in a way that changed glass for churches and institutions and private homes. So
There's a church on York Road that has Tiffany windows in it. At St. Paul's down.
is there? I've got one.
It's St. Paul's Episcopal.
Okay, I've got one Philly church. This is from my hometown of Oswego, the only Tiffany glass in Oswego. It's at the cemetery in the Page Memorial Chapel. Obviously rather somber, not bright. There's First Presbyterian Church, Philadelphia, on the left. This picture of Queen Marguerite of Savoy from 1881, that is glass.
Really?
That is
That is
all
unbelievable.
glass. Where the leading comes in is in the pattern of the fabric behind her. In all of these places where you see a dark line is the leading. Here, 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 here,
Whoops.
through there. And then this is like an obsolescent glass, but blue, that's been pulled and shaped. I saw this picture and it was hard for me to believe that that's actually a stained glass window and not a painting.
That First Pres church, what part of the city is that in?
I don't know where First Presbyterian is. It
Is it the one in Germantown?
Well, I was wondering because
it might be.
I believe
Because they
the
do have-
windows in
they do
the
have
Methodist
them.
Church are Tiffany also.
Okay,
So
yeah,
it's-
that's
there's
probably on.
It's probably on Shelton Avenue then.
Yeah.
If it is
Yeah, that church has the
First
largest
Presbyterian Germantown.
church pipe organ
Oh yeah, it is then.
in
I just had that
the
conversation.
United
with
States.
somebody. Yep, probably.
This is First Presbyterian Church, Brooklyn Heights. Again, Tiffany. Here, as opposed to the painting of the Queen, you have the metal, the bars to hold all of the window in place. And they really intrude in some ways on the dynamics of the window itself. But it's Tiffany. This is another Tiffany window. This, the one on the left, is actually taken from a painting by Raphael.
Mm.
Um, and that was something that was done quite often by Tiffany and others 100 years ago, was to take famous pieces of art and then make them in stained glass. I guess the question is, does this detract from worship or does it add to worship? Is it just bragging rights to say I've got a Tiffany window in my church? Or is there more to it than that? This is Bolt Castle, which is up in the Thousand Islands. And in the main entry hall is this domed stained glass picture I took when I was up there the last time. It's just been completed. Bolt Castle was built by the general manager of the Waldorf Astoria. He also managed a big hotel in Philly, built it for his wife, turn of the century. They were about 2/3 of the way done or so, and she suddenly died. And he called and told them to walk off the island, and it was just left, never touched
I
until
think it looks like an umbrella.
it does, yeah. The Bridge Authority, the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority, bought the island, and they have been in the process for the last 20, 25 years or so restoring the entire house to the blueprints that Bolt had made. It's a marvelous place to visit. Great boat ride through the islands. Okay, right nearby we've got Glencairn.
Yeah.
Some of the glass in Glencairn is actually medieval, but when he was building Glencairn, they actually imported both stone cutters and glass makers from Europe. They set up a village like there would have been in medieval times and made all the glass according to medieval specs for the cathedral and for the house. It's a wonderful place to visit, but guess what? You're not going to get there now for another 4 years. It's closed as of the 1st of May. They have drilled into the parking lot for thermal heat for the house, and I don't think the cathedral, but for the house. And so they're closing the building. I think they're going to rip out all of the heating system, the electrical work, plumbing, everything over the next 3 years. And will be then, I think it's 2023, 4, maybe, that it'll be reopened again.
Geothermal.
Yeah.
What you're saying?
Yeah. So it will be a greenhouse.
Just Glencairn has been closed. I don't think the cathedral's closed.
No, the cathedral's not closed. And the other house, which was his father's house, the original house, the Pitcairn, that's open. And so you can visit. Yeah, and that's a great place to visit too if you haven't ever been there.
That's Carnwood, right?
Pardon?
Carnwood?
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
never been to that one.
Yeah.
that's nowhere near as magnificent as Glencairn.
Oh, no.
No comparison.
Frank Lloyd Wright great architect of the 20th century, also designed stained glass for homes. The last major work he ever did is just down the road a piece. Um, the Beth Shalom. I think he died like a year after it was finished. He was very active in its construction and its work. Um, so
Wow.
First Presbyterian Church of Stamford, Connecticut,
Different.
stained glass, 1956, 57. Um,
Strange.
that's stained glass in a modern context. Just, I think I would spend all my time just looking at the glass. All right, now we're going to look at the Willett Studios are the ones that made the glass here in this church. So this is a history of Willett. I was really surprised that they're the ones that did the glass. They were the preeminent stained glass people at the time. Founded 1898, made their way from Pittsburgh ultimately to Philadelphia. They joined in with the Hauser or bought out the Hauser Glass Company from Minnesota. And 1951, they started doing work. The church here was built, what, 58?
58.
They did work at the World's Fair. And then later was reincorporated under a different name. 2008, they expanded their business. 2014, the Hausers retired, and then it was acquired by Willett Hauser Architectural Glass. So they are still in existence. The building's glass can be found in all of the states and across the country.
They're not based in Philadelphia anymore, though.
Right.
And in the last 5, 6, 7 years, they actually came and reassessed our windows and made recommendations about long-term repairs to consider.
Okay.
But they actually came back and valued them and everything for us too.
Are they out in Minnesota now,
I think they are.
where Hauser
Would it
was?
have any, I'm just texting you on this, because of that, I didn't know that.
What
I
about it?
wonder, would it be worth pursuing to see if we could be a historical building because of that?
No idea.
Well,
I mean, I have no.
get
I don't
that,
know.
But I would think
No,
it would
I
be
don't.
worth pursuing.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. I didn't know that was Willett Glass.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Wow.
Okay, now we're going to look at the church windows. These are pictures I took. They're not the best. What we're going to do is, as you come in the back of the church, we're going to go to the left and around the bottom and all the way around to the right.
Oh, Arizona. Somebody said they're located in Arizona now.
Then we're going to do the upper, we call the clerestory windows, again, from the left all the way around to the right. The upper windows are the parables of Jesus. There are 20 of them. The lower level are the miracles of Jesus, and they're a combination of actually 10 windows with 2 panels each. The main window over the altar, do you know what its technical name is?
Nope.
It's the Trinity window. And I'll show you why. But let's look at some windows. This is the first one on the
Back left.
back left, on the bottom. The miracle of the fishes, if you remember the story from John. I did not quote the whole text, but you see the fish in the net sweeping around the fish. You have the cross, 2 different kinds of crosses. Um, what's it,
Latin cross, you said, and
the,
the St.
the
Andrew's
Tau,
cross.
once it, can't remember, I just, no, well. This is the stilling of the tempest, when Jesus fell asleep in the boat and the storm came up. Um, and you can see the waves, the waters, and the hand of Jesus calming the waters. All of this work, this is painted work. Where you see this is all painted. Again, you draw a cartoon on paper, you line it out, you then do your glass. This would have been one panel of glass. These would have been separate, smaller panels. Wherever you see the leading, that earmarks a panel. And then it would have been fired. The glass would have been cut, set, painted, fired, and then installed. The healing of the man who was crippled. Remember the story? They lowered him down through the roof. Here's the cot on which he was lowered. Here it is, rolled up because he was able to walk away. And here the sign of Christ, the box.
Are they identified upstairs anywhere?
No, not on the
So
windows.
if you walked in, you wouldn't know what they were. There's
That's
nothing
correct.
to telling you what it is.
And I really think that we really ought to do a small booklet of some kind, which we could actually print here.
He means
Well-
a reprinted one that's colored.
Yeah,
Because
that
that one doesn't have
Totally
it.
agree with that. We are missing the boat to not have that.
yeah, so that visitors would know
Yeah, absolutely.
what.
Anybody could read what they are. They're just so beautiful.
Well, I don't know. I looked at these windows and I didn't have the foggiest idea what they were all about.
I bet you didn't. Yeah. I didn't either.
This is the one where I sit next to. I figured this one out a long time ago. The feeding of the 5,000. Now, if I'm right,
It's because there's 12 baskets.
there's
1,
12
2,
baskets.
3, 4,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
and there's one right behind the hands.
Right there?
Yeah.
12. If you remember the parable, there were 12 boxes of the fish and the
Leftover.
bread left over.
I really think we should look
Isn't
into
that all explained in,
In that book, yes,
Yeah.
but that's not readily available to anybody that might come to the church, or even probably a lot of the members.
no, because they were put out, what?
Yeah,
Back
we've
in the
had them for a
60s?
long while.
No, this was done in, well, probably, yeah.
Booklet was put out in the 60s.
I
And-
really think we're missing the boat here if we don't pursue those the windows in that sanctuary.
No.
I mean, it's a hassle to be a historical site, but it would certainly be worth it. at least
Well,
once.
when the church was first opened, they did do a lot of that.
They did lessons each week on them.
They had lessons on them. We had
No,
small
I get
groups and
that.
stuff.
She's talking
Not
about
now.
publicity
Yeah,
beyond the
Going forward.
church about the
There are
importance
pros
of the
and cons
windows.
to being a historical
Right, but
site,
isn't
too.
there, the church is on some kind of a trail, that's what that green plaque is in the front.
yeah. The
part.
township
Right.
has a trail of all the old, and that's because of the old church that was put up.
Well, and obviously, though, if that's true, that's so old. Who knows about it? I've been the pastor of this church for 7 years,
The historical
and
society of
no
Upper
one
Moreland
from the
would have
historical
that.
society's
So
ever kind
they
of mentioned that.
started- I mean, we are
Yeah.
already on the historical Upper Moreland, on
Right.
their
Right.
radar, so
Right.
it may not be as hard to make it a historical site.
That might be a state or federal related thing, though.
Well, designation is a federal thing. This is the raising of Lazarus. These are the wrappings,
I knew that.
and again, the symbol of Christ. The marriage at Cana of Galilee. The jugs of
Water to
water turned into wine. I want to know how many hours the committee sat down trying to figure out what they wanted in these windows and what the debate was like.
A lot,
I'm sure.
a lot.
I like this one.
Christ healing the blind, the deaf, and the dumb. You've got the eyes, ears, and mouth, and the hand. And again with the cross over the hand. Jesus walking on the water. What you've got, this is Peter, keys of the kingdom, and he's sinking in the water. And here you have Jesus at the very tip of the wave. Again, I'm not the best photographer, but these didn't turn out too bad.
No, they're good.
Again, raising the son of the widow of Nain. Again, you've got the bed, the cot, the butterfly, symbol of resurrection. Healing of the centurion's servant. Here you've got the Roman.
I don't even remember seeing that one.
This is the last one by the computer, the soundboard. You've got the Roman flag bearer, the tent. Okay, now, okay, yeah, we've gone all the way around the church. Now we're going to go back to the left, and we're going to go upstairs.
So you've done the first floor already.
So that's the last.
That's the end of the first floor. Now, this picture is totally different from the others. I had to come back because I screwed it up. So I had to take it different. It was a different day. It looks different and everything. Each of these windows is...
You got the light fixture.
Well, they've all got the light fixture in. There's no way to get around it unless you lift it up on a scaffolding.
Drone, that's what we need. We need a drone. Oh, we should borrow my brother-in-law's.
Just
Sorry.
whatever. You've got the separating of the sheep from the goats. Here's the sheep. Here's the goats. And on this tree, the barren fig tree. Now you'll notice the next picture is darker. It was a darker day.
So the upper one's to pick two things.
Yes. These are the parables. Here you've got the prodigal son on this side, and the tares, the wheat, here and here on this side. You've got the coat, the robe that the son, the fatted calf, the open hand, the stick with a backpack.
We're missing the boat
Return
here.
travel.
This should be a documentary or something done on these windows. Come on, I got vision here, people.
The question is, are any
We
of
need to learn them
are
first.
any of the committee members still alive?
I would have to look that up
I
in
was
my
gonna
book.
say-
I have a list. I've got 2 great big books of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The history.
I
Um,
bet this came from a glass, people.
I
bet that
don't-
this came from a
I
glass.
don't, there may be 1 or 2, maybe Mary Lou
um,
might have been on that committee,
the other thing is if they had notes.
but I would.
If anything, I
would-
think it was probably her father. I think it might have been her father. That
yeah,
was
it
on.
might
You
have
had
I
been.
think she was too young to have been on it.
You're
Sorry.
not advancing.
Well,
You're
no,
way
Sorry.
she would have been.
Sorry, guys.
One more. There we go.
She's
see.
old. She's older than I am, and I was out of school when we opened the church.
All right,
So
okay.
she probably would have been in her 20s.
We were in the old church.
Spelling error here.
was
They
the
weren't
year
the.
that-
It wasn't the Good Samaritan. It was the Good Samaritan. Sorry about that.
Weren't the
Uh-huh.
windows made after the church though?
No, no, they were put in before we had our first service.
So before 58.
58.
58 or before, I think.
Our first service was September of '59.
Okay.
So maybe they started the building, took it.
In
The
took
58.
cornerstone is '58.
Right.
Yeah.
So in the service. Yeah.
But there was no way we could have met in a church without the windows in.
It would have been.
Well,
just
they
a-
might have put temporary stuff.
It would have
in.
been just a
No.
shell.
No, the windows were in when we moved in.
Mhm.
Okay. Here you have the Good Samaritan. You've got the bandages. You've got the coins that he paid for it. And here you've got needle and old cloth and new cloth being bound together. Um, oh, that doesn't say anything. What happened to my notes? Um, hmm. Apparently, I didn't add notes on the last few. Sorry about that. That's all right. We got it right here.
Looks like another healing of paralytic on the right.
Wait a minute. This is backwards from where I go because this book goes the other way. Okay. The Pearl of Great Price is this one. And then the money received buried in a sack. And this is the Great Feast. Table is set for the invited guests. All right, now this one isn't going to have anything either. Sorry, I apologize.
Just proves you're human.
No, I'm not. I just pretend to be human.
That's got to be built on the foundation. Ask,
Um,
search, knock.
the drawn net gathers all kinds of fish with the hand of the fisherman, and then the
Solid
house built
foundation.
on
Solid
rock
foundation.
and sand on the
Yep.
right. I must have fallen asleep before I finished these. New wine in old bottles on the left, and then on the right, the leaven. The top 11 is a bowl which put in the 3 measures of meal to leaven the whole and produce the loaf seen at the bottom. The lost sheep. The sheep is caught up in a bramble. You can see him there. And then the mustard seed. Tiny mustard seed, scarcely seen among the roots of the tree which grew from it and which houses the birds of the air. So it's way down there.
Bottom right, the mustard seed?
Yes.
The lamps.
The 10 virgins here, and the talents here.
Are there 10, 5, and
Pardon?
how many? There's 3 different. Are they the talents that were given to the servants?
Yep.
Where's the one that was buried?
Wait a minute.
Oh, sorry.
At the top are the 5 talents, which were increased by trade to 10. In the center, the 2, which became 4. At the bottom, beneath the spade, is the single talent.
Oh, I see it poking up there.
Way down here.
Be a sermon series.
It was apparently originally.
Yes.
They did a sermon series several times.
You've got the rich fool on the left. The barn is that of the rich fool who stored up his fruits and goods. The steward striking at the heart symbolizes the warning, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. And the other is the sower. See the seeds, hand of the sower at the top, scattering the seeds, some devoured by the birds, some choked by brambles, some withered because of falling on stony ground, and the lower ones are planted well. The Pharisee and the publican in prayer on the left, and on the right is the lost coin. It unfortunately, I cut it off. There's more down here. There's a coin right there. I'm sorry. I told you I wasn't the best photographer. I tried. Now,
There we go.
this is called the Trinity window. We have
Creation at the bottom.
Well, start at the top. We've got the Lamb of God, we've got the Holy Spirit, and the hand of God. God, Jesus, Holy Spirit. There's your Trinity. Okay, we start at the bottom with creation. Again, because of the distance and everything, it doesn't show very well. There's a fish right there. That fish pops up elsewhere. You have Adam and Eve being expelled from the garden. You have Adam and the animals, naming of the animals. You have the flames stopping anyone from getting to the tree of life. Then we have Moses kneeling at the burning bush. His sandals have been set aside because it's holy ground. Then we have Isaiah. We have the tongs here. Again, this didn't show very good. It would have been better to do each section, but we have the angel touching his lips with the hot coal and the open book. Then in the middle, we have the birth of Jesus, Mary, and the baby. Then we move up to the crucifixion and the resurrection. Over here, the baptism by John the Baptist. We have the Last Supper. And I always thought this was Jesus, but it's Peter. It's Peter and Pentecost. The flames on the heads of the disciples.
I'll bet a bottle of this is on another stained glass window somewhere over in Europe. Not maybe laid out this way. I'll bet anything it is.
Could be.
I don't think this could have been created just for our church. It's got.
Well, it could have been. These artists, you know.
I know, but I'm just thinking there's so many stained glass depictions in cathedrals all over Europe.
No. Hard to tell. Here,
It's hard to tell.
you've got the Lamb of God. You've got the 7 seals, which are here. So that's the Trinity window. I sit there and I look at it all the time. I look at things in the window, like there's a fish over here. You've got the fish here. You've got one here.
There's a giraffe over there on the
There's a
left.
giraffe. Yeah, there's other animals too. There are images that join the window together. If you look, you have straight line here, 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 here. All of it flowing together. Then when you go to the narthex, you have windows out of the old church. And then if you go in the chapel, you have 3 more windows. They aren't positioned like that. This middle window is off to the right side. These 2 are up in what would be the chancel area on either side of the altar. So that's it. That's all I got. I ain't got no more.
Very good.
I do think that adapting this booklet, there's a lot more here than somebody just walking in the church would necessarily need to read. The pictures in this are drawings. They're not photographs. The only
I wonder if they were
photograph
actually
is the
put
main
together
window.
by the studio itself. I wonder if the studio.
Oh, I
offered
think
that.
so. That their name is on the.
Yeah,
It was
right on the
probably
back, it says
yeah.
the
It was
same
probably
quality.
produced by them
Yeah.
for us.
Well, that book is
Then they had
different
a
than the one
committee.
we have.
I was gonna say, where did you get your book?
This book?
Yeah.
They were given out
I know,
right
where
after the
did you
church
get it?
opened.
There's still a few of them, a dozen of them here in the church.
Because
I probably gave it to him.
Huh? How about
All right.
yours?
It says in here acknowledgments regarding the script, what's written in here.
All right, people on Zoom can't hear.
A manuscript from the Willett Studios giving a brief description of the windows has been enlarged with a partial interpretation of the parables and miracles. So the windows, the art and arrangements of this at least were by Ernest Knaus and Oscar Bohm, along with the minister. The building committee, much credit due to the building committee, Mitchell Davis, W. Edward Allen.
Mitchell Davis is Mary Lou's father
Okay.
And jeans.
and Jean's father.
R. Homer Cherry, Guy Cooper, Reverend Paul Felton, Daniel Helwig, Mrs. Mildred K-O-E-T.
Cothey,
Cothy, okay. Ronald Pugh, Philip Scribner.
Schneeweiss.
Sorry, I'm not German. So those were some of the people that.
Ronald Pugh is Gene Dorozinski's father.
Right.
And
And would have been
Graham.
Mary Lou's father-in-law, right?
No,
Mary,
Jean's
I mean
father-in-law.
Jean's father-in-law. Jean's father-in-law.
So,
I got a couple questions.
yep.
How long do you think it took them to put all this together up there?
Well,
Our windows.
If the
Yeah,
cornerstone was laid in
windows, sure.
58 and they worshiped in 59, it was a year. Now, when they laid the cornerstone, my guess is part of the structure already was there.
Yes.
That was just a symbolic laying of the cornerstone in 58.
Anybody wants anything about the history, I've got two great big scrapbooks at my house. You're welcome to come down and look through it.
He has a lot
I
of.
would think that the designing of the windows had to start long before we laid the cornerstone.
I would guess
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
under the
that's what you were asking.
well, the way things work is, first of all, you decide you're going to do it, then you hire a contractor for the building, and you hire the studios for the glass. You do all of the preliminary work. The thing is, if the studio had the dimensions of the windows, those windows could have been built 1 or 2 years before they even went in, because it takes that long to fire them. You know, I don't know whether it's blown glass or whether it's glass that's poured. And then
Did those windows come from the old church?
these did.
Yes.
Was there an
I need to
architect
grab something.
involved in the design of this?
Of the church, oh yes, you had to have an
Who was
architect.
it?
I don't know.
I have that listed too somewhere.
George D. Savage.
I mean, he's got an anniversary booklet.
I've got an anniversary book.
Given that the cornerstone was laid in 58, they probably started construction 56.
I think it might have been early 57, but don't quote me on
Okay,
that.
but
Ground was broken on May 4th, 1958.
oh, it was that early or that late.
Cornerstone laying ceremonies were October 12th, 1958.
There was arson that was at the house when the church was burned down. Isn't that there too?
That was the
That's
old
the old
church.
church.
Back in the 1890s, the old church was burnt three different times.
Yeah, but we had a parsonage right down on Church Street.
The parsonage was torn down when the
Because
educational wing
Felton's
was built.
lived in there.
You know, I'd be curious. My employment was insurance,
Right.
arson, and all that things. Cost in 58 versus cost in 2022
Well,
for the windows.
I'm sure.
That I'm thinking.
I'm sure somewhere in the church are trustee records that go back to when contracts were let.
Yeah.
The church may even have the blueprints here. They should.
They were,
Tip.
I've seen blueprints.
Um,
Well,
they're upstairs.
I can tell you, I went through my stuff and I listed the total. Now, I don't know whether this was the actual cost or the estimated cost. Was $19,498. The chancel window was $7,500. the upper windows were 400 each, and the lower window was 175 each.
Now, to put that in context,
Yeah, let's
What
do
would
that,
it be
yeah.
worth today?
Well,
when
she's-
they were evaluated for
Yeah.
repairs that were needed and for current replacement value, the current projected total of some repairs that were recommended to be working over time was $87,000, and the replacement value for the windows themselves was $802,000. So they're worth over $800,000 now.
Yeah.
I was wondering about that
To
when I was
replace
writing
them,
this down.
to replace them for what
Right.
they are, for what they are.
And that actually.
And that's just the side windows, not the big one.
That's all of them together.
All of them together.
Let me look at the.
Wow.
But I would say it was in the early 1950s when this area was developing that they first started talking about building the new church. I mean, I can remember when you
When?
went up Church
53.
Street Hill to the top and it was all woods.
He said 53.
53 is when it was first considered too large.
It's in the anniversary book.
Yeah, I have that one too. I didn't go through that one. Didn't get that
The
far.
current replacement value of the Trinity window is approximately $246,000,
What was
quarter
that?
of $1,000,000.
For
The Trinity
the big window.
for the
front window.
Trinity window.
I think that's low.
I did think it's low too.
How long ago was that?
2016.
Wasn't that long?
Okay, so that's add another 25%. Cool.
So,
Well, thank you very much.
okay, before anybody vacates,
But this also estimates all of the doors. Like what you guys might not recognize is that like even those doors that are in the entry, like the double front doors have a replacement value of $12,000, and they're in bad shape right now too.
I'll do it for
Yeah.
11. Yeah.
all right,
It's crazy.
next month will be the last of these. I'm not going to do any more unless I somehow get persuaded. And because of the nature of what I want to do on spirituality, we'll meet here, but we're not going to do any hybrid at all. And I thought, in deference to those people who have not been able to come because they work or whatever, that maybe we would move that Tuesday morning session to Sunday afternoon. That next Sunday is the 15th. Mother's Day is the Sunday before that. So we're not conflicting with that. We're going to end that session with a brief worship service. And it's going to be a very tactile kind of thing. I'm going to bring in things, some of which are 2,000 years old, for you to handle, to think about, and what it meant to whoever may have made it, or people who handled it over the years, and what all of that may ultimately mean today. So, with your permission, we'll move that like to 3 o'clock on that Sunday the 15th. That's after lunch, before supper. We should be able to accommodate.
I might need to talk to you about that date.
Oh.
We
All right, we won't move it to the 15th.
well, it's possible we might be welcoming our new music director,
Okay,
and it might be on that Sunday,
well,
which means we might also potentially,
Something for that.
yeah, be intending to stay a little afterwards. I mean, I don't know.
well, but if we do it 3 o'clock, that shouldn't interfere with anything, depending on where, but we can talk about it.
Okay.
It's not a problem. So anyway,
So that's in May, right?
yeah, that's May. The only other presentation I might make in the fall would be one on the Holocaust effect on Fort Ontario and Oswego and the safe haven and the Holocaust survivors that were brought there. the only ones that were brought to this country during the war, and their story and what it means, especially after the one on Terrazin, where so many people were asking
Mm.
about that as well. So, anything else?
I just came, I had no surgery this morning.
You know, one thing that kind of was missing, maybe it's because there weren't any.
Yeah, no,
You know, when
mine's
you
been
talk
on my
about
leg.
paintings,
It's the second one.
fresco, you can always find masters, right? People can say, well, this was done by that master.
Not the windows. That's a whole different craft guild.
Did you guys want to say anything? Ask anything?
Well, I don't know that we know who. I don't think we know that. I didn't delve into the individual computer or the cathedrals and their histories and everything specifically. But during the Middle Ages, you had craft guilds, and you didn't cross over from one craft guild to another. If you were a goldsmith, you didn't paint. If you were a painter, you didn't do glass.
But somebody had to put it all together.
Well, that was your architect. That was your builder. Very often, there weren't formal architectural degrees. People became known by the work they had already done. And so these building manager architects would move all over Europe building churches.
And then find
And another craftsman would travel too.
Yeah, the crafts, a lot of the crafts, if you were a stone cutter, a really good stone cutter, you would follow these architects around. And then you would apprentice local people. The same with the glass. When I was at Glencairn, and by the way, this Saturday at Glencairn is a stained glass workshop. I don't know if they have any openings or not. Glencairn had a lot of trouble mastering glass color to match medieval color because the formulas were lost. Again, if you want to protect your business, what do? You keep it up here in your head, and you teach your apprentices, but you don't publish a book on it, because then everybody can do it, and who needs you, even if you're the best? So you had all of these different guilds that were working, and I think probably that's why. I don't know that any famous painters, even like Michelangelo, Raphael, did any windows. If you go to the Vatican, the artwork that you see in St. Peter's is not paintings. They're mosaics, because canvas deteriorates, but mosaic doesn't. And you can clean the mosaics, but they look like paint.
Yeah, so there's really nobody we can look back on and say, as far as
You know,
glass
we
and
can say
glass,
Tiffany
that
windows.
looks like- well,
Yeah, and but the further back you go, the records aren't as complete.
Yeah.
You'd have to go into the history of architecture.
And an individual church history.
Thank you anyway.
Anyway, okay.
Not anyway, just
If you want music attuned to it, Respighi's Church Windows.
Oh gosh, the fee goes up.
Whoa.
That's got the channel coming in that driveway. The driveway.
Bye, everybody.
All right, John. Get out of here.